It's very kind of Baron to say that, but I'm here on a mission. I'm here to tell you the other side of the story when it comes to the non-technical aspects of it, especially because I've had some experience doing some pretty transformative changes at scale at large companies. This specific one was an initiative called Clean Room while I was at Zynga. I joined Zynga in 2013 as the head of SRE. Cool. With that, let's get started. Did you know that up to 99% of the alarms at ICUs or NICUs are false positives? How many people knew this statistic? Can't see a lot, but a handful. But that's quite a staggering number, especially given the fact that their lives are at stake. In fact, I had first-hand experience with this when my twins, who are 4 years old now, they were born at the NICU, and I still remember, each time an alarm went off, my wife and I used to freak out. I was an ops guy. I'm still an ops guy, and each time you get a page, the adrenaline rush that you get, right? So we used to go, run to the nurses and ask them like what's going on, and they were like, yeah, we've seen this before. It almost felt as if they knew which alarms to respond to and which alarms to not respond to. Anyway, in fact, because I'm an ops guy, I could not. This was in 2013, and in the same year, someone did research at some university and came up with this thing where apparently there was in 2010 someone died because a alarm was noticed or went unnoticed by 10 nurses, not one. So this is actually a real problem, right? So in terms of, before I move on, if you again, there's a paper on this topic if you are interested in learning more. In terms of, what we can learn from healthcare is, normally when we are like adding monitoring, which is to say something's not working properly, we sort of get a bit, I would say, greedy, again, depending on the team, and people just keep adding alerts without actually knowing why something should be an alert. Again, more alerts means more people, more money, more monitoring, and most importantly, I think in the case of healthcare, I think what they were trying to do was they were trying to account for that 1% use case where they did not want to miss an alert. So because of that, my guess is what is happening is they are able to keep up with all those false positives just because they want to catch that 1% failure case. So being in tech, obviously, websites down is not the same as someone losing their life. I think we have a bit more luxury on what we can do. So it's important to, have your monitoring be like targeted. Is it really actionable? You should be asking those questions. Okay, enough of healthcare, right? So let's see how I attempted to solve this problem at Zynga. Zynga, as you all know, this was back in 2013, a pioneer in the hybrid cloud. All new games were launched on AWS. Once the traffic patterns were predictable, they were brought back in-house into a private cloud called zCloud. Brilliant strategy. There was no way Farmville would have scaled to 75 million users in like 5 weeks without the use of AWS, although it had a lot of bugs back then. There was also, towards the end of 2012, there was also a central team. It was called a CTO team, which was formed to move more from a monolith to a more of a microservices or a service-oriented architecture model. Like back then, they didn't call it microservices, but we always used to joke. I mean, if you have to build a game, especially a mobile game, you actually didn't need a server. Even in SRE, we were like, what are we going to monitor now if there's no servers? So everything was an API call. But large scale, as you can see, so a pioneer on many fronts. But when it came to alerts, things were a bit crazy, I would say. Roughly about 100,000 alerts triggered every month that went from all the studios. There were about 26 game studios that went to a 50%, actually it was probably larger than 50% SRE team in 3 different locations. That was, what you see on the screen is roughly the model. Alerts go to tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, like all these multiple tiers, which did not make a lot of sense before they went to the dev teams. As you can imagine, at that volume, SRE was sort of best effort, right? There's no way humans can keep up with, if someone told you they can keep up with 100,000 alerts, they're lying, right? Ideally, you should get to less than 2 alerts per shift, and then so that you can keep up with root causing the alerts. Because of this, we had like large NOC, which was tier 1, and they had monitors. So if you have a new game or a new studio, you said, I want this metric to be monitored. It could be peak simultaneous users or game players or your RPS numbers. And then there was a large screen, and pretty soon there were like 50 screens. And then once we moved to Mountain View or from Mountain View to San Francisco, we lost some of the screens, fortunately or thankfully, and then it went down to 30 screens. But there was all these screens, and people were like, doing their best effort in terms of monitoring what they could of all the alerts, and that was like 2 or 3 people per shift. As you can imagine, because humans can keep up with that stuff, alerts were color-coded based on priority. So for example, if it was a mem-based alert, it was like some version of red, which means it was critical. If it was, again, a stateful service. If it was a stateless service, then it was probably some version of yellow. And the other important thing you need to note, especially at a large company, some teams are actually given priority based on the revenue they make, right? Which is not the right thing to be doing. Or whoever made the most noise, right? So what was happening was teams, game studios, who were good citizens and kept their things clean, were sort of penalized for keeping their things clean just because they did not make enough money, right? Again, the wrong approach to be taken. We should be incentivizing teams to keep things clean and actually give those teams the best quality of service that you can actually give. So not a great way, right? As a result, as you can imagine, there were frequent outages. In fact, I still remember those dreaded escalation calls that used to come to me saying some alert was sitting with the SRE team for a long time. It was not a fun situation to be in, not fun at all. And most importantly, I think the customers were suffering as a result. If you ever played Zynga back in 2013, there were some pretty severe outages back then. Things have improved a lot since, but okay. People tried doing a lot of things. In fact, the previous leader tried to throw people at the problem, and this graph clearly demonstrates there's no way you can add enough heads to solve this problem. There's no little way, right? Because the alerts grow dramatically, and you just can't add enough heads in your NOC or staring at screens or executing playbooks. So that's not going to work. Filtering noise is also not going to work, right? Just a suggestion. Make sure that you're fixing alerts closer to the source, right? I'm not a big believer of having filters in between, which claim that they can somehow magically, apply some algorithms and, try to make sense of a situation and present you with something which is like a consolidated version. So again, it's important to filter alerts closer to the source, right? I'm not going to talk on how we do that, but I'm sure you guys can figure that out. All right. So what is the answer to the problem? Like, how did I attempt to solve this, right? Before you start try to bring about any change, I think it's important as a leader or otherwise to have a strong vision of where you want to get to. You should have a very strong vision, right? So to me, I was always about, as I mentioned earlier, get to less than 2 alerts per shift so that you can actually keep up with root causing each alert, right? Page the devs directly. There should not be anyone in between alerts and the dev teams. You wrote it, you own it, sort of philosophy, or you wrote it, you run it. SRE teams or similar teams, I think, should be focusing on infrastructure and tooling and dev tooling and observability and whatever and all this, all the good stuff, right? And ownership, which I just talked about. And also wanted to get to 0 TVs, right? I just wanted to change that model where we went from having a NOC to having the alerts page the dev teams directly so that the TTR and the TTD are dramatically reduced. So that was like the ultimate vision. All great. But when I started having conversations with teams, they were not going too well. For example, I used to go to, I was on call. I trained myself to be on call, although I didn't have to. So I used to see all these alerts and just sitting there and not like no one's taking them. And then I used to go to people's desks, the dev teams, and they say, hey, dude, what's going on? And Nagios is all red. Like, can we talk? The very first response I always got was, can you just go back and have your team, the SRE team, actually work on responding to the alerts, and then we can talk strategy? So not very encouraging, right? But I was like, that's okay. People did not. The credibility was almost lost of the team, so there was not much I could do at that point of time. I think it was really up to me and the team to build up that credibility, which is how which you'll be seeing some of that in this talk. What was also interesting was when I looked at the SRE team, I stole this from the Google SRE book, but it's a great way of representing the complexity of or reliability from a complexity perspective, from the lowest to the highest, right? So you start off with like monitoring, incident response, postmortems, and all the way to like making product changes and making actually the product itself more reliable. So when I looked at my teams, they were like all over the place, like depending on the team and which studio they were embedded into, they were like all over the place, right? Some were focused on monitoring, some were like doing product changes. So what happened was like their fundamental job, which is like the first 3 layers, those should be table stakes, right? Someone should be doing them. So they were ignoring those, and because of that, we were not able to be as productive as we could have been, right? So this was important. But then I engaged, I persisted. I used to go to people's desks, as I told you. I was on call, made some progress, but things were not going very far. Right, we made some improvements, and we brought down the alerts, but things were really not moving very far. And guess what? One day there was a massive outage, right? As any large company or any company for that matter, you're always going to have outages, right? If I remember correctly, the outage was there was a broadcast storm in the network because of a faulty switch or a router. And then the application was not able to deal with it gracefully, and because of that, it was crashing, and it actually impacted a lot of games. And then there were more outages, which was very, very, very frustrating. And then during one outage, I still remember that day, I was frustrated, angry, and I was like, this is it. We have to do something dramatic. Any guesses as to what I did? Any guess? Just take a guess. Anyone? No one read the abstract? Come on, guys. All right. Again, the whole talk is around this one simple idea, right? I decided to deny SRE coverage based on alert budgets. So the idea was to establish a contract with every game studio, and then say, if you go over this alert budgets or noisy alert budgets for a week or a month, you will be kicked out of the clean room, or you will be denied SRE support. But if you stay within, then obviously you'll be rewarded with good 5-minute SLAs, and will be world class and things like that. So that's like the fundamental idea of this. Again, pretty simple, common sense, but most people, I've not seen a lot of people do it. Anyway, but as you know, saying hard is saying no is hard, but it's very powerful. I mean, we don't say no for so many reasons, for social cohesion, because we are always. It's so easy to say yes, but it's hard to ruthlessly prioritize and say no to something. But if you can do that, amazing things can happen, right? So it's important to say no, especially if you think something is not working, and if you believe in something, then. And it's anyway. In terms of what I did, like sort of, if I break down my my journey and break it down into rules, there's about like 5 or 6 different rules which helped me get to that point. Obviously, the idea is simple, right? You say you deny SRE coverage, opt is not free, it has to be earned. But how do you go about bringing this transformational change at scale, right, at a large company? So rule number 1, leverage outages, right? So each time there was an outage, there was not much of a culture of postmortems. I sort of brought that to Zynga, and after every incident or every major outage, I made sure that we conducted a postmortem. We focused on the lessons learned. Not just that, I sent out weekly reports to the whole company as to where the remediation items are, what the status is, so that people knew that we were also closing the loop. What that meant was, basically, we were like the team and I, where we were establishing our credibility back at the company, and people were willing to at least talk with us because they knew we were actually serious about reliability and we're serious about our customers. So that's rule number one. There's always going to be outages. Make sure that you leverage them. Rule number two, find your allies, right? And you're not just magically going to find allies, right? You have to go out to people. You have to reach out to people. You have to be comfortable setting up meetings, talking to people, explaining the problem you're trying to solve, explaining the vision, your vision, get feedback. In my case, Zynga's CTO was almost radically aligned with me. So it made my job a bit easier because he actually believed in my vision. In fact, I don't think Clean Room would have happened without him. Again, it's important that you feel comfortable going and just talking with people. The other important point here is, if you're getting a lot of resistance from a large team, try an approach where you are sort of socializing with people within the team, because it's not just the leader who is like a representative of the whole team, right? You can always find your allies within those teams, right? So if you have a strong vision, go ahead and socialize that with people within that team and see if they would be willing to be your champions, right? I think that's an important point there. I found a lot of people like that as well. And then as I started talking with all these people, that's when it struck me that I think everyone wanted the alert volume to be low, but not many people knew how to do it, nor they had the right incentives, nor the tooling to actually get that done. SRE, on the other hand, was this horizontal org which was serving all these studios, and we were in that unique position to actually get that done. So I think that was a nice aha moment for me, because it was encouraging to me so that I could actually continue with my transformation. Rule number 3, right? Make sure that your boss is aligned with you, right? Don't try not doing things without your boss knowing. But I can't stress how important this is. Your boss's boss, and everyone else, right? Because when the time comes to make that decision, they will be your champions, right? In my case, when I had the outage, I actually called him and told him, this is it. I'll be making some pretty dramatic changes. Expect some backlash because of this. And he was like, yes, and again, because there were so many outages, people were more receptive to a more dramatic change. But regardless, make sure that you keep people under your upper management in the loop. Not just your boss and your boss's boss, but make sure you're actually getting buy-ins from everyone across the company, especially if you work at a large company. A great way to do this is to set up meetings or request to set up meetings with if there's executives, like I set up meetings with their EAs, like explain your vision, explain it clearly, concisely. Be prepared to answer any questions you may have. Leverage outages, conduct postmortems. That's how you actually become visible, and that's how people start to notice that you're actually you care about this stuff and you want to do something about it. Okay, and then if you remember the pyramid, my team was all over the place, right? So we talked about how actually I got support, how laid down the rules, but it was time now to say no to my team, right? Why? Because again, if you look at the pyramid, I wanted them to focus on monitoring, incident response, and postmortems first, baby steps, right? Let's prove to the company that we can actually deliver in those areas, and then we'll automatically be given more, right? So it was actually time to say no to my team. Pissed a lot of people off. We'll talk about it. But you should be ready to deal with that backlash. Said no to the dev teams, right? This is what I told him. Not every dev team deserves SRE support, right? It is something that must be earned. It's not free. You have to give up your headcount, not just giving up your headcount, right? You have to stay within those contracts, established contracts with your SRE teams or other operations teams, and make sure that you hold the teams accountable. Like, this is a key point. you can imagine the response from the dev team wasn't great. Like they were like, some people were like, we pay your salaries. You exist because of us. You can't do this. But again, there was a lot of escalations to my boss and my boss's boss, which is where I said, if you remember, it's important to get buy-in from them so that they can manage that situation when these escalations do happen. Because the first time you say something as dramatic as this, people may freak out, or they may not. My team, on the other hand, obviously because of the fact that I was taking some responsibilities away, and no one obviously likes that, but I knew long-term that was the right thing for them. But they were talking about job security and things like that, and I told them, look, eventually, if you want to work on higher value at work, we have to start, focusing on one thing at a time, prove that we can deliver, do the handoff to the dev teams, and then we can focus on like going up, up the pyramid. Some threatened to quit, and some did. They showed me something, but that's okay. But the important thing is, if you are serious about a transformational change at scale, you have like half-assed approaches are not going to work. Like maintaining status quo is the easiest thing ever. Anyone can do that, right? But if you want to bring about a radical change, you have to be willing to take a stance, be firm on your vision, and then be willing to work with the people who actually believe in your vision and then rally them around your vision. So I think that's important. But some people left, and it is what it is, I guess. Again, I think I covered this already. Like, don't forget the power of no. Important point here: it's not enough if you, as the leader, says no. Your whole team, you should be empowering your whole team to say no, right? Because if you're not going to say no to low-level tasks, there's no way you can say yes to things that matter, right? So this is an important point as well. But stand firm, right? Again, the promise, as I mentioned earlier, was higher value at work. And some people said, what if we automate everything, what are we going to do? I said, no, that's never going to happen. You always have things to do, right? And then we established the contracts individually with each of the studios. The way we did that was we baselined alerts and then came up with targets, and each team was given some time to clean up, right? Simple. But then establish those contracts. Some teams needed more time than the others for several different reasons, but I think the important thing is establishing those contracts. And this became a corp initiative, always helps. Okay, if you remember one of the rules that I mentioned, it always helps to get buy-in from senior leaders, because that's when it can actually become a corp initiative, and that's when you could actually start to have quarterly goals, and when you're launching, everybody is in anticipation of how the launch is going and things like that. So if you're serious about it, make sure that there is buy-in from official buy-in from upper management. It's just you have a greater chance of success. Okay, so all this is good, right? But how do you actually go about reducing the alert noise, right? I never talked about that. The technical aspects of it. I talked about creating incentives to keep the volume low. I'm not going to cover a lot on this topic, because that's not what this talk is for. I'm sure there's been a lot of talks on how you can reduce the alert noise. But in general, the philosophy has always been, first, define an alert, right? Define what an alert is. There has to be a difference between an alert, a ticket, a log, an event, right? Hopefully your alerts are not events or emails sent to your inbox, right? Those are not alerts. Alerts are something which go to a pager, right? Which go to a phone or a pager, and it needs immediate attention, right? Just the way my wife and I used to freak out every time there was an alarm. I mean, my kids were there, so obviously, if you're at work, obviously your customers are will suffer if you don't respond in a reasonable amount of time. And most importantly, the second point, you must have heard this, is again, it requires human intelligence, right? It should only be something which an automated system is not able to fix. It doesn't make sense sending alerts which can be fixed by executing a playbook. It absolutely doesn't make sense. If humans are executing playbooks that are automatable, like zero value of doing that, right? Okay, in terms of a bit more about the process and culture, like public shaming, peer pressure is a great way to bring about change. Like no one likes large numbers or small numbers next to their name, especially like SVPs or whatever, right? No one likes that. So if you can, if you have a program manager or even yourself, if you're running an initiative, make sure you're sending weekly reports with percent saying this is the progress. And once they start seeing, oh shit, my team is, or my BU business unit is like so far behind, they start to take that stuff seriously. I mean, don't be a jerk, but there's a way to do it. But a very, very, very effective technique. Like no one likes large numbers next to their name. Again, basic stuff. Make sure you're root causing. There's a daily incident review or a weekly incident review. You're sending weekly reports. You're staying on top. In our case, obviously, we were working with each of the dev teams. We had incident reports, and we were like, working with them closely, with the dev teams closely to reduce the alert volume. The other thing, auto remediation, as I mentioned about executable playbooks. Make sure you have some kind of an auto remediation framework in place so that humans don't have to execute playbooks or fix alerts if you can. And try to differentiate between logs and alerts and tickets. A simple example is, a stateless machine is down, and like don't wake someone up in the middle of the night for that, right? Just take it out of rotation. If it's unhealthy, file a ticket, look at it the next day. There's no value in waking up someone at 2 a.m. when that can be automated so easily, just taking it out of rotation. The other thing is, again, I always like dreamt of a day where if you have a large product, you have only like 2 or 3 alerts, and all the alert said was, your RPS or your latency or like things that customers experience. If you can, we are not there yet, but hopefully we can get to a point where your whole stack or your whole architecture is based on just a few alerts, and everything else is automated for the most part. I think with things like Kubernetes and you can get there, but it's still a journey. Okay, baby steps. We started off with one team, showed to the company that this was actually possible, and then we moved on to more teams. Momentum will pick up. It's important to keep at it. We launched. Yes, we did kick a few people out ruthlessly. In some cases, people lost. There was a lot of attrition. So we gave some studios more time to fix their things. But overall, it was a success in terms of the metrics. The alerts dropped to a few hundred a month across all the studios. The SRE response times was now like 5 minutes. Previously, it was in the order of hours or maybe more. Again, it was best effort. It was no longer best effort. It was guaranteed as long as you were within your alert budgets. SRE credibility was almost back. More teams wanted us. I think most importantly, the availability went up by a whole 9, and the customers were happier, and all good stuff. All right, some closing thoughts. I always like to talk about this. If you notice, all I did was to align the incentives, right? I think as humans, we all need some incentive, some sort of motivation to do something, right? So if you can create those incentives somehow, leveraging whatever you have at your disposal, then it's a great way to bring about a transformational change. And this can be applied to so many different things: technical debt, end-of-lifing products, or legacy stuff, false, failing tests or intermittent tests. There's no limit to what you can do with this model. You have to align the incentive, right? It's so important. Again, I think talent is sort of misused, especially in large organizations. I was reading this article on HBR, and I think I agree. But I think most important thing is, if you are working at a large or small organization, make sure you learn to say no to things that don't matter, right? If you want to say or if you want to say yes to things that matter, right? It's so important. But saying no doesn't come naturally for most people, but if you can do it, then I think you can go a long way. Generally, this is, again, I think if you look at the SRE engagement model, if you remember like what my vision was, it was always to get to a point where the dev teams own their operations. So that's my dream, that's my vision. Whichever company, that's what I've been trying to do at Yahoo as well, is to remove all those layers between the alerts and the dev teams and have them own their stuff, including on-call, test, deploy, build, monitor, incident response, everything, right? But as ops teams or the non-core dev teams or the SRE teams, our job is to enable those dev teams, build them the tools, train them, set them up for success. And it could be automation, it could be infrastructure, it could be observability, it could be expert services, right? But it's important I think the ownership part is critical. That's what I was trying to get to at Zynga. That's what I'm trying to get to at Yahoo as well. There was this awesome post by someone at Google. So if you have time, you should read it. It talks about the SRE engagement model at Google. And apparently at Google, SRE is optional, so you don't get SRE for free. And I think it's a great way to create the right incentives, right? And to incentivize dev teams to do the right thing, write good software. Finally, again, one favorite question I always like to ask is, why does my team even exist? Right? What value are we providing? Are we detracting from the value? Once you start asking those questions, especially when you're doing your annual planning, so many things come to mind, come up, right, surface, and you start to think, oh, shit, I didn't know that. And it's important to ask that question and find out from your customers if you're actually really providing value, right? And then get their feedback and then iterate on that as needed. I always like to end sort of with this slide. This is sort of my guiding principles. Enable a culture of ownership and excellence, engineer automated and agile processes, and develop self-serve and reusable tools. So any decision I make with my team is sort of goes with these founding or with these guiding principles, if you wish. That's it. Good luck. Thank you for attending, and I think I have time for some questions.
We do have a few minutes for questions. Happy to run the microphone over to anyone. Just raise your hand.
You can shout, I can hear.
Hi. Without obviously going into specifics, I was interested in what sort of category of people did a runner and quit when he ran out this policy.
Well, I think some people just, I don't think you can say category of people. I think it's probably the wrong way to look at it, but
I was wondering whether it was sort of development or your SRE team.
Some managers left, people who did not believe in that vision, and people, some folks on their team left. So you can say the managers who were working for me who did not believe in that vision. So once a leader leaves, I think the people who believed in his vision actually believed in it and then left the company.
Thank you.
Yep.
Anyone else?
And please leave feedback. I mean, I would love, even if it's bad, I would love any feedback just to make things, to improve this talk the next time. I would highly appreciate that.
Hey, you said peer pressure was a useful way to make people sort of take ownership and care, but when would you say that's appropriate, or when to stop doing that? Or does that ever become non-motivational in some way?
So if I understand your question, you're saying peer pressure is good for people to take ownership, but you're asking when is it not the right strategy? Or when do you stop?
Yeah, so when does that become detrimental?
Well, I mean, there's just like anything else in life, there's a balance, right? You don't, normally what has happened in our case is once something becomes an initiative, a company-wide initiative, I think that's a great time to apply pressure because you're trying to get people to comply with that. But I think it's wrong to put peer pressure when you're just at the very early stages, right? People haven't bought in it yet. But once enough people have bought in, then there's always going to be stragglers, right? Like large company microcultures exist. So maybe with those stragglers, I think peer pressure is a great way for them to realize, you know what, this shit's real. I mean, I better get going, right? I've seen that a lot at Yahoo as well, especially when we were doing CD. We moved to CD, 3 years ago at Yahoo, and it was a pretty painful journey. Like some teams just don't want to do CDs, continuous delivery, I mean. So I think that's one approach. But don't do that like early on, right? I mean, it's a free world. So yeah, if that answer helps. I think I have a question there.
I'm just wondering, you were saying that you had, excuse me, several different dev teams, studios owning products. Did you have any issues with getting the alert data in front of the right people? So like how much visibility did they have to the problems that their own apps were causing, I guess, is sort of a...
We had a central, I mean, the beauty of this model, again, the SRE team was a central org. So we had a framework where all the alerts from all the dev teams used to flow into, if they wanted to onboard to SRE. So we already had that framework. In the new framework that we built, we made it actually even more easier to track alerts through their life cycle, including like who actually is owning that alert. So I think that was helpful. But to answer your question, there was a framework and all the alerts, flew. So it makes it easier. I don't think every studio was on it, but most of them were on it. 2 minutes. Any more questions? Now's the time. I'll run away after this.
All right, let's thank Kishore once again.
All right. Thank you.